I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay with me until the end, because if you leave before I get to the part where I explain exactly how it was done, you're going to walk away thinking this couldn't happen to you. That's the most dangerous thought you can have. I thought that too. I thought that right up until a lawyer in Phuket slid a manila folder across a desk toward me and said, very calmly, very professionally, that the documents I had signed were not what I believed them to be. I remember looking at that folder and thinking, there has been some kind of mistake, a clerical error, something lost in translation. I was a sales manager for 31 years. I spent my career selling to people, reading people, understanding the moment a pitch was working and the moment a customer was about to walk. I was not the kind of man who got sold. That was my fatal flaw, if I'm honest with you. That was the thing that Mint understood about me before I understood it about myself. My name is Keith. I'm 65 years old. I was born in Wolverhampton, and I spent most of my working life in the West Midlands managing sales teams for a mid-sized industrial supplies company. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make the newspapers. I drove a company Vauxhall and attended too many Monday morning meetings, and once, in 1997, I won a regional sales award that my wife at the time put on the mantelpiece for about 3 weeks before it got moved to make room for a fruit bowl. That marriage ended in 2011, not dramatically. Not with screaming or lawyers or a custody battle over the dog. It just ran out of whatever it had been running on. And one day, Caroline looked at me over the kitchen table and said she didn't think we were happy. And I realized I'd been thinking the same thing for about 4 years and hadn't said anything because I didn't want to be the one who pulled the trigger. We sold the house. We divided the furniture. She moved to Shrewsbury. I moved into a flat above a dry cleaner's on the Wolverhampton Ring Road and tried to remember what I actually enjoyed doing when nobody was watching. I didn't find an answer to that question for a long time. I worked. I retired at 62, with a pension, some savings, and a sense of purposelessness that I don't think I fully acknowledged until I was sitting alone on Christmas Day with a microwave meal and the television on for background noise. My son Paul lives in Vancouver now. My daughter Emma is in Edinburgh with her family. They're good kids. They call. But calling isn't the same as being there, and being there wasn't something that was happening very much. I had money. I had time. I had nothing much to put either of them toward. A mate of mine from the industry, a bloke called Neil who'd retired 2 years before me, went to Thailand on holiday in early 2018 and came back an entirely different man. Or so he seemed. He was tanned. He was lighter somehow. Less burdened. He showed me photographs on his phone of a beach in Phuket, a beach with water so clear it looked like glass, and he told me that he'd eaten the best meal of his life at a restaurant that cost him the equivalent of £4.50. He talked about the warmth of the place, and he wasn't just talking about the weather. He said people smiled at you there. He said it felt like the world before the world got so exhausted and suspicious of everything. I listened to Neil and I thought, I want some of that, not as a holiday, as a life. I had £395,000 in liquid savings. I had a pension coming in. I had no mortgage, no dependents, no reason to stay in a flat above a dry cleaner's in Wolverhampton for whatever years I had left. I booked a flight to Phuket for October 2018. I told myself it was a recce. I told myself I was just going to look. I arrived at Phuket International on a Tuesday afternoon, and I remember the heat hitting me as I came out of the terminal building. Not unpleasant. Dense and warm, like stepping into a room full of people. The sky was the particular blue that only exists in photographs until suddenly you're standing under it and it's real. I'd booked a hotel near Patong for the first week. A decent mid-range place, nothing extravagant, and I spent those first few days doing what retired British men do in Thailand. I ate seafood. I watched the sunset from a bar on the beach. I walked through markets in the evening, feeling pleasantly invisible. Nobody knew me. Nobody wanted anything from me in the ordinary way of things. After 40-odd years of performance reviews and quarterly targets and being needed for specific transactional purposes, there is something remarkable about anonymity. I felt it like a physical relief. The timeshare presentation was on my 4th day. I want to be clear about how it happened because it matters. I didn't walk into it blind. I was approached by a young Thai woman near the Jungceylon shopping center in Patong who offered me a free breakfast at a resort just north of the main beach area. "Scratch cards," she said. "Win a prize. Come and see the resort, have breakfast on us, leave whenever you want." I knew what it was. I've been in sales long enough to know what it was. I went anyway, because I was curious, and because I was, and I'm going to use the word now, that I refused to use for a long time, lonely. Not desperate, not sad. Just the particular kind of lonely that comes from having days with no shape to them and no one to share the shape with. The resort was called Andaman Prestige Collection. It was genuinely beautiful. Open-air lobby with ceiling fans and orchids in ceramic pots, a pool that seemed to go directly into the sea on the horizon. Staff who moved quietly and smiled without the performative urgency of hotel staff in England. I had breakfast at a table overlooking the water, and I felt the specific feeling that comes from being somewhere that seems to operate by different rules. A slower physics, a gentler mathematics. And that is when I met Mint. She came to my table after breakfast with a folder of brochures and the kind of smile that I genuinely know, even thinking back to that first moment, was professional. She was 29 years old, and she had the easy confidence of someone who is good at their job and knows it. She introduced herself. She sat down without asking if she could, and she started talking about the resort's ownership program not as a sales pitch, but as a conversation. That was the technique, though I didn't name it as a technique until much later. She didn't lead with price. She led with experience. She asked me what I loved about where I was sitting at that moment, and I told her, and she nodded like I'd said something insightful rather than something obvious, and then she said, "What if you could guarantee this view for the rest of your life? What if you owned a piece of this instead of just visiting it?" I told her I wasn't buying anything. She said she wasn't selling anything. She was just showing me what was available. She had a way of speaking that reminded me of the best sales reps I'd ever managed. She never pushed. She just kept the door open wider. By the end of that first morning, I'd agreed to come back the following day for a full presentation. I told myself it was professional curiosity. I told myself I was studying the technique. That was the lie I told myself on day 4. By day 14, I was eating dinner with her 3 evenings a week. The transformation from professional acquaintance to something else happened in the space of about 10 days, and it felt, at the time, completely organic. Looking back, I can map it almost mechanically. The breakfast presentation on day 4, the follow-up where she asked what I was doing for dinner, as if it were an afterthought on day 6, the evening walk along the promenade on day 8, where she told me about her family in a village outside Phuket town, her mother who sold somtam from a cart, her father who had left when she was 11. She talked about her family the way people talk when they're not trying to make you feel sorry for them, which, as any salesperson will tell you, is precisely the most effective way of making you feel sorry for them. I didn't analyze it that way at the time. At the time, I thought, here is a woman who has had a harder life than mine and has come out of it warmer. Here is someone uncomplicated by the particular bitterness that the English carry around like luggage. I want to say something here about what it is like to be a 62-year-old man. I was 62 when I met Mint, who has been alone for 7 years, not unloved, not without purpose. Just without the specific warmth of someone who is pleased to see you when you walk through a door. There is a particular kind of validation that I had been living without for so long that I had stopped noticing its absence the way you stop noticing a sound until it starts again. When Mint was pleased to see me, it was visible. She was bright. She touched my arm when she laughed. She asked questions about my life in England and listened to the answers with an attentiveness that I had not experienced in decades of meetings and appraisals and office small talk. I know how this sounds. I know exactly how this sounds. I'm telling you anyway, because the sound of it is the point. By the end of my first 2 weeks in Phuket, I had extended my hotel booking by another 3 weeks. I told Paul it was because the weather was good. That was true. It was also not the reason. The timeshare itself, the actual property product, was called a points-based fractional ownership scheme. 125,000 points, which gave you 4 weeks per year in any Andaman Prestige Collection property across Thailand and 3 partner resorts in Southeast Asia. The entry price was 1.8 million baht. At the exchange rate in October 2018, that was approximately 43,000 pounds. I did not pay it that day. I told Mint I needed to think about it, and that was genuine. I did need to think about it. I am not someone who makes financial decisions impulsively. I spent 2 days going through the paperwork, looking at the terms, running the numbers. The math wasn't terrible on its face. 4 weeks of resort accommodation per year, over 20 years, cost averaged against hotel rates. If you used it consistently, there was a reasonable argument that it represented value. I knew the model had structural weaknesses. Timeshare resale markets are notoriously illiquid, and annual maintenance fees had a tendency to escalate. I knew this. I had read articles. I was not uninformed. What I was motivated to find a reason to say yes. I bought the timeshare on a Tuesday morning in late October. 1.8 million baht, 43,000 pounds, at the rate on the day. I signed the contract at a desk in the resort's business center while Mint sat beside me as, officially, my customer liaison representative. She was professional throughout. She walked me through each page, pointed to the relevant clauses, asked if I had any questions. After I signed, she shook my hand. That evening, without any apparent professional reason to do so, she sent me a message asking if I'd like to celebrate with dinner. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I didn't know, at the time of signing, that Mint received a commission on every sale. I didn't know that her commission on a 1.8 million baht contract was approximately 180,000 baht, roughly 4,300 pounds. I didn't know that the Andaman Prestige Collection operated on a commission structure that incentivized agents not just to close sales, but to close the largest possible version of those sales. And I absolutely did not know that Mint's family, her mother, her uncle, her cousin Weera, who managed the resale division, operated what was, in effect, a separate business built on top of the primary timeshare scheme, a secondary layer, a commission fraud running parallel to the legitimate operation. I learned all of this later, from a lawyer, from documents that had been signed with my name. For the 2 months that followed the initial purchase, I want to be careful to give you the accurate version of what those weeks felt like, because it is tempting in retrospect to color them entirely with what I know now. The truth is that those 2 months were, moment to moment, genuinely good. I was in Phuket. I was warm. I was eating well. Mint and I had fallen into something that functioned like a relationship. Dinners, weekend drives to the beaches on the west coast, an afternoon at the Wat Chalong Temple complex, where she told me about Buddhist traditions with a seriousness and a pride that I found moving. I was learning words. I knew the word for thank you, for delicious, for beautiful. I knew what farang meant because it came up often enough, foreigner, or more precisely, the word for a white-skinned Westerner, and I heard it sometimes in conversations around me, attached to the general category of man I'd become. I didn't mind it. I felt like I was becoming something other than purely a farang. I felt, which is a sentence I can barely write now, like I was becoming part of something. In December of 2018, I flew back to England for 3 weeks for Christmas. I had dinner with Emma and her family in Edinburgh. I spoke to Paul on video call on Christmas morning. I sat in my flat above the dry cleaners and looked at the ring road through the window and thought about Phuket with a longing that surprised me with its intensity. Mint and I messaged every day. Long messages. Detailed messages. She told me about her days, about a problem at work, about a neighbor's wedding she'd attended. She asked about England, the cold, the gray, the smallness of the portions. I found myself explaining my country to her, as if seeing it freshly through the eyes of someone who found it baffling. 3 weeks in Wolverhampton felt like an interruption. Thailand felt like where I actually lived now. I returned to Phuket in January 2019 with a clearer sense of what I was doing. I had decided, and I want to acknowledge that this was a decision I made freely and after genuine thought, to give Thailand a proper attempt, not a holiday, a life. I rented a condo in the Kathu district, a 20-minute drive from Patong, quiet, residential, a small complex with a pool, 12,000 baht a month, reasonable. I began the process of applying for a non-immigrant O visa, the retirement visa, which required evidence of either a monthly pension transfer or a lump sum deposit in a Thai bank account. I opened an account at Capricorn Bank. I deposited 800,000 baht, the required amount for the visa. This was a transaction I did myself, carefully, with documentation. I was not naive about the bureaucratic requirements. I was organized about it. What I was not organized about was Mint. She came to see my condo the week I moved in and she stayed for 3 days. That felt natural. After the 3 days, it felt natural for her to have a key. After a month, it felt natural for some of her things to be there. By March, she was spending most nights at my place, and by April, she had effectively moved in, though her name was not on the rental agreement, and she maintained, nominally, that she had her own accommodation with a cousin somewhere in Phuket town. I met the cousin once. I don't remember much about her. I remember she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read at the time, something between appraisal and pity that I now understand entirely. Mint was still working for Andaman Prestige Collection. I thought nothing of this. She was good at her job and she seemed to enjoy it, and her schedule was flexible enough that it didn't interfere with the time we spent together. She worked mornings mostly, she said, and sometimes attended evening presentations. There were occasional Saturdays when she was unavailable because of resort events. I didn't question any of this. I was 62 years old and I was not her father. I did not believe it was my place to account for her professional time. I think I was also afraid that asking too many questions would make me seem like something I did not want to be. A controlling older man, suspicious of a younger woman. That fear of seeming like the thing I most wanted not to seem like was something she had understood about me before I had named it myself. I was managing my image in her eyes, and that image management was a rope she could pull. The second financial conversation happened in March 2019. Mint told me over dinner that Andaman Prestige Collection had a new product, a premier gold upgrade to the points program I'd already purchased. An additional 75,000 points, access to private island properties in the Andaman Archipelago, guaranteed category upgrades at all properties. The cost was 950,000 baht. At the current rate, approximately 23,000 pounds. She told me this as information, she said, not as a pitch. She wanted me to know about it because it genuinely represented better value for my level of usage, she said. She had clients who hadn't been told about the upgrade early enough and had regretted it. I said I'd think about it. She nodded and changed the subject. She was very good at changing the subject at exactly the right moment. I want to tell you about a conversation I had in February 2019 with a man called Ian. He was a British expat I'd met at a sports bar in Patong where we'd both gone to watch a Premier League match. We got talking. He'd been in Thailand for 8 years, married to a Thai woman for 6 of those, divorced for 2. He told me the story without being asked, because that is what expats in Thailand do. They tell you their stories in bars while sport plays on screens above them, as if the story needs witnesses. His version involved a house in the east of Phuket that was in his wife's name because foreigners cannot own land in Thailand, and that was how it worked. The house had been sold during the divorce. He'd seen none of the money. He was philosophical about it. "You know going in that the house is hers," he said. "The stupid thing is you think love changes the math." I remember nodding and thinking, but my situation is different. Ian had married someone he met in a bar. He'd rushed it. He hadn't taken time to understand the culture, the person, the situation. I had been careful. I had been measured. I had not been impulsive. I had my eyes open. I remember the ceiling fan above the bar making a slow rhythmic sound, slightly uneven, like it needed a balance adjustment. I thought, I should mention that to the staff. I did not mention it to the staff. I forgot about it completely, and I mostly forgot about Ian's story just as quickly, which is something I now find remarkable. I had been given a precise preview of what was about to happen to me by a man who had lived it, and I filed it under irrelevant to my circumstances within 20 minutes. I bought the Premier Gold upgrade in April 2019. 950,000 baht, 22,600 pounds at the rate on the day. I paid by bank transfer. Mint organized the paperwork. I signed at the same desk in the same business center where I'd signed the original contract 6 months earlier. Mint was present as my customer liaison representative. She was professional throughout. Her commission on this transaction was approximately 95,000 baht, around 2,250 pounds. Her total commission from my purchases so far was roughly 6,500 pounds. I did not know any of this. I thought I was making investment decisions. I thought I was building something. What I was actually doing, and this is the part that required a lawyer to explain to me 8 months later, with documents, was funding a parallel income stream that existed inside the legitimate structure of the timeshare program, and that Mint and her family had been running for, as best as anyone could establish, approximately 3 years. Here is how it worked, as I eventually understood it. The Andaman Prestige Collection was a genuine timeshare company. It had genuine properties. Its salespeople were on genuine employment contracts with genuine commission structures. Mint was a legitimate employee. Her sales were legitimate sales. Where it became something else was in what happened after those sales. Mint's uncle, who I will call by his nickname because that is how Mint always referred to him, she called him Uncle Napong, ran a separate company that operated as a timeshare resale and upgrade consultancy. This company was registered legitimately. It had a website. It had a business address in Phuket town. Its stated purpose was to help timeshare owners navigate the secondary market, upgrade their packages, maximize their points value. It charged fees for this service. These fees were in some cases substantial. The connection between this company and Mint's role at Andaman Prestige was not disclosed to clients because there was no formal obligation to disclose it. There was, however, a very obvious conflict of interest. Mint identified high-value clients through her work at the resort, and those clients were then contacted by Uncle Napong's consultancy with propositions that generated additional income for the family network. The fees charged for these consultancy services were, in several cases, for services that were either minimal or notional. In my case, they were for services that had not been performed at all. I'll tell you, when I first started to feel that something was wrong, it was June 2019, not a dramatic moment, not a revelation. Just a feeling, arriving slowly like weather, that certain things were slightly off-register. Mint had become, in some hard-to-define way, slightly less present, not absent, not cold. Just less concentrated on me than she had been. She spent more time on her phone in the evenings, usually stepped out to the small balcony to take calls, which she explained as family matters. Her mother's health. Her brother had a problem with a supplier. He ran a small business, she'd mentioned before, something to do with boat rentals. I thought nothing of any individual instance. I noticed the pattern without naming it, the way you notice a smell in a house without identifying its source. In July, Mint's brother needed money for a boat engine that had blown out during a customer trip. The repair was 65,000 baht. She told me about it one evening, not asking, just mentioning. I said I could lend the money. She said she couldn't ask me to do that. I said it was fine. She said she would pay it back from her next commission. I said there was no hurry. We didn't discuss it again. The 65,000 baht left my account the following morning. I have no evidence it was ever repaid. In August, her mother needed dental surgery. 28,000 baht. In September, the cousin in Phuket town needed help with a rental deposit because she was moving 35,000 baht. Each of these was presented as a one-off. Each was preceded by a conversation in which Mint emphasized that she hated to ask, that she had tried other solutions, that she was embarrassed. That embarrassment, the performance of reluctance, was important. It made me feel that I was rescuing rather than being extracted from. The total across those 3 months was 128,000 baht, approximately 3,050 pounds. Not catastrophic, not yet. Then, one morning in October, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as the director of Andaman Prestige Resale Management. He said his name was Kun Somsak and that he was calling with an exciting opportunity related to my ownership profile. Something important in my account required my attention. Could I come to the office at my earliest convenience? I want to slow down here because this is where the second layer of the scheme began to make itself known, even though I didn't understand it as a scheme at the time. I went to the office. It was not in the resort. It was in Phuket town, on a commercial street above a pharmacy. Kun Somsak was in his 50s, in a good suit, with the practiced authority of someone who sits behind desks and commands rooms. He explained that my ownership package had been identified for a premium resale opportunity. There were buyers, he said, in the Andaman points market, specifically Chinese buyers who paid premiums for high-value Western-registered accounts. My 200,000 points, he said, could be sold for approximately 3.2 million baht, profit of roughly 1.4 million baht over my purchase price. Tax implications would be managed through his company for a standard processing fee of 15%, and there would be a separate registration clearance required on the original contract, a fee of 320,000 baht to prepare the account for transfer. I want to tell you what I thought in that room, because I think it matters. I thought, this is a scam. I recognized it, the logic of the premium buyer, the urgency of the opportunity, the upfront fee disguised as a processing cost. I had heard versions of this architecture in 30 years of sales. I said politely that I would need to take legal advice before doing anything. Kun Somsak nodded, as if this were entirely reasonable, and gave me a business card. I took it. I left. I told Mint about it that evening. She listened carefully. She said Kun Somsak was legitimate. She knew of him, she said, through industry contacts. She said the resale market for points-based timeshares was real, and that some of her clients had made good returns. She didn't push it. She mentioned it once more, a week later, just to check that I hadn't forgotten. I said I was still thinking. She said, of course, take your time. She changed the subject. I did take legal advice. I contacted a Phuket-based solicitor who handled property and contract matters for expats. His name was Stuart. He was Scottish. He'd been in Thailand for 15 years. I made an appointment for November 2019, and I brought every document I had: the original timeshare contract, the Premier Gold Upgrade Agreement, the correspondence from Kun Somsak's company, and a folder of bank transfer records I'd kept from the beginning. I sat in Stuart's office, which smelled of coffee and printer paper and had a ceiling fan that worked perfectly, no clicking, and I watched him read through the documents with the slow, careful movement of someone who already knows what he's going to find and is preparing to explain it to someone who doesn't. When Stuart looked up from the folder, his face had the specific expression of a man who is about to say something that is both honest and difficult. He said, "There's something here I think you need to understand." He put a document on the desk in front of me. It was the Premier Gold Upgrade Agreement I had signed in April. He pointed to a clause on page 4, section 11, subsection C. He read it to me. The translation, as he paraphrased it, was this: by signing the upgrade agreement, I had consented to allow my ownership profile to be listed with Andaman Prestige's affiliated resale partners for secondary market activity, and had agreed to pay any applicable activation and clearance fees associated with such listings. The activation and clearance fee was, per the clause, calculated as a percentage of the estimated resale value and was due on demand upon the listing being activated. The percentage was 10%. The demand could come at any time once the listing was activated. The listing, Stuart said, appeared to have been activated already by Kun Somsak's company, which was, as Stuart had confirmed through his own inquiries, the company owned by the family member of my sales representative. I remember Stuart's ceiling fan. I remember thinking it was turning at an unusual speed for a November afternoon, because November in Phuket is still warm enough to need a fan, but the season was shifting, there were clouds. I remember thinking, I need to fix a ceiling fan. And then the information Stuart had just given me landed properly, like a delayed sound reaching you after the flash, and I put my hand flat on the desk in front of me, and I said, so the contract I signed gave them the right to invoice me for a fee I didn't know I was agreeing to. And Stuart said, that is broadly what the clause says, yes. And I said, and Mint knew this when she put the contract in front of me. And Stuart didn't answer that directly. He said, the conflict of interest is significant. I said, they're her family. He said, that is what I've been led to understand. My hands were steady on the desk. That surprised me. I would have expected them to shake. Instead, there was a strange stillness, as if my body had decided that panic was not the appropriate response and was searching for one that was. I said, how much is the fee they're going to claim? Stuart said, based on the activation notice they've sent to the company's registered address, which you are legally part of because your ownership is registered there, the fee is 480,000 baht. I translated that automatically. About 11,500 pounds. Stuart said, that's the initial figure. There may be additional service charges accrued on the listing. I said, what do I do? He said, the short answer is, don't pay it. The longer answer involves challenging the contract clause on the grounds of non-disclosure of the conflict of interest, which you have a reasonable case for, but which will take time and legal fees. He looked at me levelly and said, I've seen versions of this before. The structure is clever because it sits just inside legitimacy. It looks like a contract, The fees looked like standard industry charges. Without reading the clause carefully, you wouldn't know what you'd agreed to. I thought about signing that document in April while Mint sat beside me as my customer liaison representative. I thought about how she had walked me through each page and pointed to the relevant clauses and asked if I had any questions. She had pointed to the relevant clauses. She had pointed specifically past Section 11. I drove back to Kathu in the afternoon. Mint was at the condo when I got home. She was cooking a Thai rice soup she made with ginger and fish sauce and coriander, a smell I had come to associate entirely with comfort. I sat down at the kitchen table and I looked at her and I said, "I need to talk to you about Kun Somsak's company." She stopped stirring. She didn't turn around immediately. She put the spoon down very carefully on the edge of the pot, and then she turned. Her face had settled into something I had never quite seen on it before. Not guilt, not quite. Calculation. A brief, involuntary calculation, like a recalibration, before the mask came back up. She said, "What do you want to know?" Not, "What are you talking about?" Not, "What do you mean?" She already knew what I was asking. I asked her whether she was related to Kun Somsak. She said he was her mother's brother's business partner. Not family exactly, she said, just someone she knew. I asked her whether she had known, when she put the Premier Gold contract in front of me, that signing it would create an automatic listing with his company. She said, "The contract explains everything, Keith." "You signed the contract." I said, "You sat next to me while I signed it and you pointed to the clauses." She said, "I explained what was relevant." I said, "You chose what was relevant." She looked at me and her voice shifted and she said, "You don't understand how this industry works." I said I was starting to. She said, "I did my job. I showed you a product. You decided to buy it. If you regret buying it, that isn't something I can help you with." I want to tell you about the quality of that silence. The soup was still on the stove. The ceiling fan in the kitchen was turning. I looked at this woman who had been in my life for more than a year, and who had been in every day-to-day interaction warm and specific and present with me, and I watched her become, in the space of that conversation, entirely other. Not monstrous, not obviously villainous, just professional. She was, in the end, doing a job. I had been the job. I stayed in Thailand for another 3 weeks after that conversation, partly because I needed time to work with Stuart on the legal challenge to the contract clause, and partly because some part of me was still hoping that I'd misunderstood something fundamental. I hadn't. Over those 3 weeks, Stuart assembled a picture of what had happened across the entire transaction history. The original timeshare purchase, legitimate sale, legitimate product, standard commission to Mint of 10%. The Premier Gold upgrade, legitimate upgrade, inflated margin, commission structure designed to incentivize upselling, secondary clause that created automatic resale listing. The resale listing, a mechanism for generating activation fees from clients, fees that were split between Kun Somsak's company and the referring sales agent. In my case, the referring agent was Mint. In my case, the fee being claimed was 480,000 baht, with additional service charges bringing the total demand to approximately 620,000 baht, just under 15,000 pounds. The family emergency, loans, the boat engine, the dental surgery, the rental deposit, those were separate. Stuart said, "Those are gone. There's no mechanism to recover personal loans made informally in cash or transfer." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "It isn't your fault." He said, "I know, but I'm still sorry." I did the arithmetic at the kitchen table in the Kathu condo one evening with a notepad and a pen because I needed to see it written down rather than held in my head where it could slip and shift. The original timeshare, 43,000 pounds. The Premier Gold upgrade, £22,600. The contested activation fee, £14,800, the full amount, including service charges. The personal loans across the summer, £3,050. Total extraction from my savings, £83,450. I sat there with that number and I thought, that could have been worse. And then I thought, but it isn't just the money, is it? Because I had also spent a year believing something. I had spent a year reconfiguring my understanding of what my life could look like. I had taken the carefully preserved accumulated savings of a working life, and I had put some of them into a system specifically designed to receive them, operated by people who had looked at me and seen a category older, Western, recently alone, professionally confident, primed to believe his judgment was reliable, and had built an approach around that category with more precision than I had given them credit for. Stewart challenged the activation fee successfully enough that the final settled demand from Kun Somsak's company came to 180,000 baht, about £4,300. He said we could fight the remainder, but the legal costs would likely exceed the recovery. I paid the settlement. I paid Stewart. I booked a flight home. Mint moved her remaining things out of the condo while I was at a meeting with Stewart. She didn't take everything. She left a pair of earrings on the bathroom shelf, a brand of shampoo she'd been using, a small ceramic elephant she'd bought at a market in Chiang Mai on a weekend trip we'd taken together in February. I don't know if the leaving of these things was deliberate. I don't know if she understood, in a general way, that leaving something behind creates a kind of unresolved energy that makes a place feel haunted rather than simply vacated. I put the earrings and the elephant in the bin. I kept using the shampoo until it ran out because I wasn't going to throw away a nearly full bottle of shampoo on principle. I flew home on a Thursday morning in January 2020. I looked out of the window as the plane lifted over the Andaman Sea, and I thought about the first morning I had sat at a table overlooking that water and felt that the world operated by different rules here. I was wrong about that. The rules are identical everywhere. The specific vulnerabilities change. The instruments of extraction adapt. But the fundamental architecture find the gap between what someone needs and what they believe they're getting, and position yourself in that gap. That is not a Thai phenomenon. That is not a cultural specificity. That is a human technology, and it works on anyone given the right conditions and the right instrument. I was the right conditions. Mint was the right instrument. I'm back in England now. I'm living in Shrewsbury, actually, which I note with the specific dark humor of a man who has reorganized his retirement to be in the same mid-sized market town as his ex-wife, though we are in different parts of it and have not seen each other. I have approximately £290,000 remaining from my original savings, which is not nothing, and my pension covers my living costs with something left over. I am financially reduced, but not ruined. I am 65 years old, with enough money to live modestly and without enough structure to feel that living modestly is sufficient. I have started volunteering on Tuesday mornings at a local charity that helps people with financial literacy. It is not lost on me that this is what I'm doing with my time. I had a call from Paul at Christmas. He asked if I was okay. I said I was. He asked if I was really okay, and I said, I'm okay in the way that someone is okay after they've learned something they needed to learn at a price they didn't want to pay. He said he didn't quite know what that meant. I said, it means I'm fine, Paul. He said, you can come to Vancouver. I said, I know. Maybe. Someday. What I want to tell you, and I mean this specifically, not generally, not as a platitude, is that the mechanism that was used on me was not primarily about love. It was about professional reading. Mint was a skilled sales professional who identified a customer profile and executed a strategy. The personal relationship was part of the strategy. It created access. It created trust. It created a context in which financial decisions felt like expressions of relationship rather than commercial transactions. I was not manipulated because I was in love. I was manipulated because I wanted to be in love, and I allowed that want to operate as a filter on my judgment. I knew how to sell to people. I had done it for 30 years. I had never understood, until now, how easy it is to sell to someone who wants to buy what you're offering. The desire to purchase does most of the work. The salesperson just has to not get in the way. If you're in Thailand now, building something with someone, and you're reading this not as entertainment, but because something in it is resonating, I'm not going to tell you your situation is definitely like mine. I don't know your situation. But I will tell you this. The feeling that your situation is different is not evidence that your situation is different. It is a feeling. It is not analysis. Treat it as a feeling and analyze separately. And if someone is about to put a document in front of you and point to the relevant clauses, read the whole document. Read every clause. Read the ones they point away from. The ones pointed away from are the ones that matter. I don't know what Mint is doing now. I don't know if she's still working at the same resort. I don't know if there's another Keith at a breakfast table overlooking the Andaman Sea right now, feeling the specific relief of a man who has arrived somewhere that seems to operate by different rules. I hope not. But hope, as I've come to understand, is not a strategy. It's just what you're left with when the other options run out. At least I have a story to tell. At least I can sit in a room and say, I understand how this works. I paid for that understanding at a rate of approximately £83,450, which is expensive, but which is also, in the end, just money. The money was replaceable, even if not fully replaced. The certainty I used to have about my own judgment, the particular pride of a man who has spent 30 years being the one who can't be sold to that I haven't fully recovered. Maybe I won't. Maybe that's fine. Maybe the world is a better place when men like me are a little less certain that we know what's actually happening. Maybe. I'm still working on that part.